Okay, we're in the second aliyah of Torah portion Lekh-lekha in our Language of the Prophet series. Welcome, Hebrew students, lovers of Lashon HaKodesh, the Holy Tongue, the language of creation, the first language. Whatever your level of Hebrew is, whether you're a beginner who just learned how to read, how to sound out the letters, or if you're deeper in the grammar, I think and hope that these walkthroughs will be useful for you. This is primarily for my current Hebrew class, for their inductive method aspect of learning, but we'll also explain some grammar rules, but I won't rehash out all of them every time, just as I felt led. And if we happen to have some concepts that come to mind from Chazal or something, maybe I'll throw that out there too. Okay, without further ado, let's get started on our second aliyah. Today's aliyah is Bereshit 12, verse 14 through 13, verse 4. So it's a little bit shorter than the first aliyah, but still worthy of discussion, of course. Let's get started. Here is verse 14. Vayhi kevo Avram Mitzrayima. Okay. So Yehi, this is an imperfect form, so it means he will, but then we have the Vav consecutive that swaps the time, so it means and he was, and it happened, right? Or it came to be, it came to pass. It's how we oftentimes see these narratives started in Tanachit, in biblical Hebrew. So Vahi kivo Avram, this is an active participle, which my current class has not learned yet. So, and then when you have a kaf attached to a participle, it usually is translated into English as when, right? So, when. So, and it came to pass when vo came, and then the subject is Avram. When Avram came, Mitzrayima, towards Egypt, literally is what it means. That last hey at the end is what we call the hey locative, right? It means direction towards a place, right? So if I say Yama, it means towards the Yam. Yerushalayima is towards Yerushalayim, right? You're traveling there. Lekh-lekha Yerushalayima, let's go to Jerusalem, right? This is how you'd say it. Vayir'u hamitzrim et ha'isha ki yafa hi me'od. When the Egyptians saw, so the Vav I'm translating as a when, the woman, that she is beautiful, that she was very beautiful. So when he arrived in Egypt, everybody starts noticing Sarai, which is an indication I read in one commentary, I think this was in one of the JPS commentaries, that Sarai was not in the habit of wearing a veil. Otherwise, how would they notice her? Verse 15, and you'll note it doesn't start with the yod, right? It's tet vav. So the logical, as I pointed out before, would be yod hey, the logical number, right? Because you have yod aleph for 11, yod beit for 12, yod gimel for 13, yod dalet for 14, and then you'd expect yod hey. But this, of course, is a nickname, a short version of the divine name. And the Masorah, the biblical Hebrew of the Bible, is very respectful of Hashem's name and doesn't use it for something so trivial as a number. So even though this isn't the full name, it's just a nick. Oftentimes Jews will say ka when we see this one, just give it a little bit of extra respect. Instead of doing 10 plus 5, that's yod plus hey, we say tet plus vav, which is 9 plus 6. And similarly with the next number, so that we don't end up with yod vav, which is also a form of part of the name. Instead we do tet plus zayin, 9 plus 7. And then it goes back to normal with yod zayin, yod chet, yod tet. Okay, all the rest are normal. Vayir'u otah sarei Pharaoh, vayhalalu otah el Paro, vatukach ha'isha beit Paro. When they saw her, notice the pronominal suffix, it does more to serve than just indicating ownership. We can put it at the end of et, our DDO, the definite direct object marker. And what does that do for us? You put the suffix on, and then that's generally what we would call that puts it in the accusative, right? So they saw whom? Whom do they see? Well, ta, her, because that's the feminine third person pronominal suffix. So if you haven't memorized your suffixes, memorize them. See how useful they are. You stack them on the end of verbs. You put them at the end of the DDO. You can put them on the end of nouns, right? They're just all over the place. And just taking a few moments to memorize the handful of pronominal suffixes will really help you a lot. So when they saw her, who's the seers? The subject is the Sarei Pharaoh. This is the captains of Pharaoh, coming from Tsar, which, interestingly enough, this is where we get the Russian word Tsar, right? Like Tsar Nikolai, right? Tsar, a Tsar, in English Tsar, C-Z-A-R, it comes from this Hebrew word Tsar, which in many contexts means prince, right? So you can see how the cognate developed a little bit, coming into Slavic to Old Slavonic and then into Russian and other Slavonic languages. So the captains of Pharaoh, when they saw her, v'haleluota, they praised her, right? You should know halal, right? We say the Hallel, right, on certain holidays, and the psalms that have Hallelu El, and the Hallel Yah, Kol Asher Neshama, right, all this stuff. So they praised her, and they praised her. Note, Yahalelu, right? This means they will praise. It's the imperfect, right? Or they are praising. But again, we have that rascal, the Vav conversive or Vav consecutive, makes the time swap in half, goes back the other way, so it's expressing past tense here. So when they praised her, or then they praised her, El Paro, to Pharaoh. Vatukach haisha beit Paro. Okay, this next word might be a little bit hard to recognize. Then that's because it's actually lakach. Lakach. So lamed is the first root letter, and then kuf we still have, and then chet we still have, right? So you should be learning now to always look for the root. If you don't know the verb or you can't find it. And our hint is that little dagash, the dagash forte, the dot in the middle of the kuf. It's telling us we have two kufs here. Remember from yesterday's lesson, I mentioned about in Latin meaning not, plus legal meaning legal in Older English, and they came together. And over time, that the English equivalent of the noon, in that case an N letter, assimilated and made the L double. So instead of in legal, you had illegal. So something similar is happening here with the lamed. It assimilates, and this happens a lot. The lamed will disappear in lakach. So you just need to get used to seeing that. So, and this is a hofal binyan. Some say hufal, which my class hasn't learned about yet, but this is basically a passive intensive form, right? So hold on, let me turn off. I have something here making a lot of noise. Down you go. And notifications. Okay, sorry about that. So, and she was seized and she was taken. There's kind of a hint of by force here, right? Notice it's not nifal, which would just be the light meaning, the plain meaning passive, but it's hofal. So it's a little bit, there's an intensive meaning here. Who was taken? Ha'isha, the woman, Beit Paro, to the house of Pharaoh. Verse 16. Ulavram chetiv bavurah. But to Avram it went well on her account, or because of her. Don't get confused and try to think of this as some passive form of avar, like to cross over or something. This is just a word you just need to get used to. It means on account of, because of, something like that. Maybe at one time it really was something like, crossing over because of them, or who knows the etymology, how that happened. But now we just know that it's connecting two ideas. Vayhilo, tzon v'akar v'chamorim v'avadim u'shefachot v'atonot u'gemalim. And there were to him, that means he owned, or there became to him, right? He came into possession of tzon. So this is a flock. It's expressed in what's called a collective noun. So even though it looks like singular, it could be rendered flocks. We don't say tzonim. You just say tzon. Kind of like in English the word deer. You don't say deers, right? I saw 5 deers. No, that's wrong. You say I saw 5 deer. in the meadow the other day, right? Something like that. So tson, it has no plural form. It's just tson. Uvakar also being used to express collectively. So this is like bovids, something like that, like, cattle, oxen, those sorts of things. V'chamorim, and male donkeys. V'avadim, and servants or slaves. You can determine it's probably slaves, right? Because they were Egyptians or non-Hebrews at least. V'shifachot. So shifcha, this is what this word is. So we have different words for female servants, female slaves. A shifcha is a female servant who was a virgin, who usually tended to the needs of the female mistress of the house, meaning the master of the house was female, right? And so she wouldn't usually be found taking instructions from the master, from the male of the house. She's kind of off limits to him, usually. This nuance doesn't always stand. Sometimes you have some crossing over or whatever. But that's generally the difference between shifcha and amma, right? Okay. So this type of female servants, va'atonot, and female donkeys. So interesting, note we have the text, make sure to say male donkeys and female donkeys. Ugemalim, and camels. This one is going to be an interesting word that the text has this in here. Well, first of all, with donkeys, and the fact that donkeys are separated so far from each other in the text, this shows that the author had understanding about how donkeys and female donkeys worked, basically. You had to keep the males separate from the females. So men of great wealth, oftentimes they'd send the male donkeys first and the female donkeys at the end of everything. Because when the male donkey senses that there's a female around, they get uncontrollable. They're like crazy. And I read about this in the JPS commentary also. I didn't know this. I'm not a donkey herder. So anyway, if you want to find out more, go check out, I can't remember which JPS commentary it was. There are several, but anyway, so there's that. But so it's nice that the text has this little. I love these little things in the Torah. You find it really is true, right? Like, it's beautiful that now we're entering into Egypt, and as one who has a keen interest in Egyptology, I've studied the language a little bit, dabbled some, and the history, and I just find it fascinating. And you end up seeing that in the Bible there actually are all these little hints, these little nuances, little things that actually are true. And it all comes together. Just, if you're a person of faith, it just increases your faith that this is a text that really is correct. And if you don't have faith and you know these things, and if you're intellectually honest, then it doesn't prove it for you, but it kind of nudges you a little bit more in that direction. Like, hey, look, these guys got an awful lot of stuff right about Egypt, which is really interesting. And also about shepherding cultures, nomadic cultures in the time, in the area. And look at here, the very last word that's mentioned, I said I'd come to it, is gemalim. These are camels. And this is quite fascinating, and it's amazing they put it last, because if you search ancient records in ancient Near Eastern literature from this time period, camels really aren't mentioned that much. And so, of course, if you're a leftist, anti-Bible type, see, the Bible's full of it, it can't be. But really, this is another one of those niceties where the text is saying this is how wealthy Avram became. He was so wealthy that he even had this elite animal known as camels. And in the biblical text, we don't really see people traveling on camels except for females. And later, coming up, we'll see them used to be sent as part of the entourage that goes to find Avram's son's wife, Rivka, right? And the camels were most likely used as a display of wealth, right? Of austerity, like, look how wealthy I am. I can provide for your daughter if you give her to my son. I even have camels, this animal that very few people have, that nobody really needs. And the camel also there's a remez interpretation of having this here. You know, we have the word, we know that Avraham Avinu is blessed. He's heard from Hashem. He's been called out from the land of his his kinsmen or the land of his birth. Moledet, we mentioned last time, can mean either of those things. It can mean kin, like your family members, those who were born near to you, and it can also mean the place where you were born. But he's also called, he's called in the singular mission. He's given the mitzvah to go to the land, which I'll show you, but he's not told what the land is. And there's just a lot of stuff that's happening here, many layers in Avram's response to the call. And it's interesting that camels are the last animal that's mentioned here, because the word barach, to bless, it's related to berech, or barkayim, right? Knees, or berech, which is a knee. And I remember reading, I think this was in the Theologische Wörterbuch des Altes Testament. And in there's a beautiful entry about this word that says that the camel would, because the camel's very tall, right? And so the camel would be carrying goods from another place, another land, or something very special. You see the camel, especially, it's an odd animal that at the time, I'm adding this next part, right? That at the time was very rare to the region. So the camel would definitely be bringing some kind of interesting object in saddlebags, or even perhaps the rider, right? Like when Yitzchak sees Rivka from afar, right? He sees something wonderful in the camel, right? But if there's gifts or some other or object of trade, it would be in the saddlebags. And the camel would have to kneel down oftentimes for the person to see what was their blessing, what was it. And very often, I learned from the great scholar Jacob Levine in one of his commentaries. He mentions that, he's commenting on the Birkat HaKohanim, the Yevecha Hashem v'Yishmerecha, Ya'ir Adonai panav elech v'yichonecha, Yisa Adonai panav elech v'yichonecha, v'yasem lecha shalom, right? That whole, may the Lord bless you and keep you, right? That whole spiel. And he comments that when it says a blessing, Yevarechecha, that these were not some kind of ethereal, good feeling, emotional types of blessings, right? Like some might think of today. But they were very tangible and even rooted in material blessings, right? That Hashem would make you not suffer materially, right? That He would give you this blessing. And so this ties together nicely with the camels, right? With the actual beast that was a sign of wealth as well. And when he would kneel down on his bakayim, on his knees, you would get the berachot, the blessings. Verse 17. Vaynaga Adonai et paro negi'im gedulim ve'et beto. But Hashem naga, He smote. It's really more like usually has to do with sicknesses. This naga, like it's literally to touch, right? Like He touched naga, right? But it developed later on to be more of like it's a bad kind of touch. it's not a blessing. And so, but Hashem touched with disease, you could say, whom? Paro, with negi'im gedolim, with great sicknesses, great illnesses, if you will, something like this. And why? Ve'et beto, pardon me, and all of his house, also, and his house, beto, his household. Al davar, concerning, or literally over the thing of, and you'll notice the merecha, tipecha, right? So these two ta'amim here indicate their relationship together. They're giving you a hint. In case you're looking for the makaf, which oftentimes isn't there, this is telling you these are in construct, right? So that's why we have to say the matter, or the affair of Sarai, because the last word in the absolute is definite, so the whole chain is definite, so we have to say the. Here, you can't say concerning a matter about Sarai. There's a different way to say that in Hebrew. We don't use construct. This is construct, so it must be concerning the matter of Sarah. And remember, you can use construct for indefinite concepts, but the last word has to not be definite. And a person's name is already not any old person, it's Sarai in this case. Eshet Avraham, another construct. See, here we have our Merecha telling us the wife of Avram, or literally the woman of Avram. Ugh. And Yeah, it's very nice. Okay, let's go to the next. Verse 18. Yod Chet. ויקרא פרעה לאברהם ויאמר מה זאת עשית לי. So, open and I'll translate Vav. So, Paro summoned Avram. Literally, he called Kara le to Avram. So that's summoned. He summoned Avram. Vayomer, and he said, Mazot asitali, what is this you have done to me? This is asa. So that's a lamed hey verb. The hey, right, is reverted back to an old tav ending. You've done li, to me. Lama lo higadta ki ishtachahi. Lama means why. Lo higadta. So this is the verb nagad. And the noon, just like in legal, has assimilated into the gimel, right? It's inside there. So that's kind of hard to recognize that verb. So why didn't you explain li to me? Ki, that, ishtacha. So again, your pronominal suffix is coming in handy. Eshet cha, right? Ishtacha, your wife, she is. That she's your woman. This might throw you off. It's an odd spelling for he, but you have to remember that the vav, as we call it today, once was a w sound, and some of the scribes, yod and waw, are sometimes interchangeable. But the Mazrits, they correct it for us here with the chirek. They put the dot here, as is our tradition in the Masorah, so we know that it's not a she-male that Avram is married to, but indeed a he, a she. Of course, it doesn't help that he in Hebrew means she. Verse 19. Lama amarta achotihi va'ekach otah li leisha. Why did you say my sister? See your suffix here, pronominal suffix. My sister, she is. Remember, you think like Yoda. My sister, she is. Yes. Right? So that will help you a lot of times with Tanachit. Modern Hebrew doesn't do this so much, again, as it's kind of been bastardized by Indo-European languages. But Tanachit, it's usually pretty straight to the point. If it doesn't put things in this order, if it said hi achoti, if these words' order was reversed, then there's some special emphasis that you would have to bring into your translation. Va'ekach, so again, magical lamed from lakach hides inside the kuf, right? So the verb is la kach, to take. Ekach, this is an imperfect, so strictly speaking, it's present continuous or future continuous, usually. Some, notwithstanding some poetry, right? So, and then the vav, that's our vav consecutive, he swaps the time, right? So it's like, this is being used to explain the urgency of the situation. About it's something that comes across into the Greek as a subjunctive mood, right? Like, and I might have taken otah, her, li, for myself, laisha, to be a woman, as a wife. Ve'ata hinei ishtcha kach valech. And now, look, or behold, as the more classic translations will say, ishtucha, there's your pronominal suffix. Make sure to learn these guys. Your eshet, your wife. Kach, again, the lamed fell away from the kach, he's gone. This is an imperative form. Take, valech, and go. It's very interesting that the Torah portion starts out Lekh-lekha, and now we have valech and go. Avram, poor Avram, he's going somewhere all the time in this pareshah. He's just walking all over the place. And by the way, instead of translating this subjunctively, you could actually translate so that I took her as my wife. That's also okay too, right? But the Midrash tells us that Pharaoh never consummated the marriage, and that he was unable to because Hashem actually struck him. We're told already that he was struck him with what? Negeim gedolim, and also ve'et betoch, and also his household, right? So everybody's getting struck. And one of the sages, I can't remember who, I'm sorry, says that it was a kind of venereal disease. So he had all kinds of inflammation, and so he was unable to perform, unable to do anything. So he could not take her to the bed. So Hashem protected her loyalty to Avram. Verse 20. Vaitzav alav paro, Vaitzav alav paro anashim. Then Pharaoh, you have to look for the subject, it's way over here, commanded, literally upon him, but I think you're starting to get the idea that this is concerning him. Pharaoh concerning him, or he gave charge to anashim, to men concerning him, right? Like he gave orders out. Vaishalechu oto et ishto ve'et kol asher lo. This is interesting. So, shalach, in the Kal Binyan, the basic form, if there was not a Dagesh Forte here, but there is a Dagesh Forte here, right? So here's our, you see it in the middle, our Dagesh Forte, that dot. If it's just by itself, it means to send, right? And we see this in the Akedah, the binding of Isaac, when the text says, Vaishlach Avram et Yado, he sent out his hand, and it's holding the machelet, the butcher knife, right? And then the Malach Hashem says, Avram. He says, Hineni. Okay, you know the story. So in that case, it's just shalach. But if you have a dagesh here, this tells us it is the PL binyan. So kal is the light binyan, the light and heavy, right? Like you probably heard the expression kal v'chomer, light and heavy, right? Or if this, then how much more so that, right? So this is the intensive meaning. So if you have, for example, shavar, he broke. Shiber is intensive. It means he smashed, or he utterly broke to pieces. You see, oftentimes it intensifies the meaning of the verb. So the PL form of to send is to expel, right? Like to expel from his land in this context, right? Or in the case of a man and a woman, it's to send her away, right? Like to divorce her. It can mean divorce. And this is part of what's confusing when later in Shemot, when Moshe Rabbeinu ends up at the border of Mitzrayim, and his brother Aharon comes out to meet him, and then Aharon says, "Who are these?" And Moshe says, "La la la." And the text later says that Moshe sent Tzipporah away, right? And so this has caused some conundrum, like, well, did he divorced her, or, which I don't think is what happened, right? But you remember there's a little bit of spiel before that. There's a problem about because the bridegroom of bloodshed are you, like when she has to circumcise their kid, Gershom. And so there's some interesting arguments that happen among the sages on that particular thing. So this verb, there's probably some emotion involved, right? He's sending him, he's not just shalach. It doesn't say vaishalchu, but it's the strong dagesh, right? Well, they, meaning the men, the anashim. And this word anashim, yeah, you can just say men, but you should be aware that there is a subtlety that oftentimes when this word is used in Hebrew, it's indicating men of shame, like in the Hebrew word shame, not shame, like bullshit, like they're ashamed, but men of shame, sheen, mem, like men of fame, men of name, literally, right? So they're probably officers, somebody important, someone that Pharaoh can trust not to mess this up, right? You don't want to mess this one up. Kimchi comments that to guard his wife and his possessions, they sent him off. They went with him as far as the border. So Kimchi has got a slightly different perspective on this. He's thinking it's to honor Avram, that Pharaoh is making sure that none of the other wicked Egyptians will harass him, right? And and Ibn Ezra says that Pharaoh put men in charge of him. Rather, he gave the men orders concerning him, and he ordered them to declare concerning Avram so that nobody would even touch him or his wife, right? So again, it's to protect Avram, supposedly, right? Like to kind of just see them off. He sent the Anashim, right, as an escort, right? In the Targum, Onkelos translates that the men were sent to, quote, see him off, right, to see him off. So, but there are some other opinions that see it another way, that actually was more of like a banishment from the land to make sure he doesn't come back, right? So it could be something like that, very well. So they expelled him, or they sent him out, ve'et ishto, and his wife, ve'et kol asher lo, and everything which was his, literally, lamed, to o, and you put a suffix to him. Okay, so the bigger Hebrew letters here are expressing chapter. So this is chapter Yod Gimel, chapter 13, and we won't be redundant and write verse Aleph, because of course it's verse Aleph. We're just starting with the new chapter point here. Vaya'al Avram mimitzrayim hu ve'ishto v'chol asher lo ve'lot imo hanegba. All right, so this first verb, you might identify it already. Ayin, lamed, and of course it's a lamed hey verb, so the hey is gone. Okay, so Allah is to go up, right? So ya'al means he will go up, but vav conversive swaps the time. And Avram went up mimitzrayim, from Egypt, who, so that's he, and ishto, and his wife, the chol asher lo, and everything which was his, the Lot, and Lot, imo, to make it make sense you probably have to insert English was, right here, was, and Lot was with, again, pronominal suffix, learn your suffixes, people, with him. Where did they go? Hanegba. So Negev, the Negev, this is the southern area, like in Judea, probably most of our ancestral lands, right, in Judea. And as I mentioned, I think before, in Aramaic, this word has to do with like drying up, something that's dry. Of course, it's the desert area, right? So it's very dry. So the region, oftentimes, like we would say the Ukraine or the Philippines, referring to a region, has the hey locative at the end, so towards the Negev. Like I mentioned before, Yerushalayim, towards Jerusalem, right? Hanegba, towards the Negev. So the story is focusing on the direction he departs towards, not necessarily his end destination. Excuse me. Verse 2. The Avram kaved me'od. So this literally says, and Avram was very heavy. He ain't heavy, he's my brother. So very heavy, but of course, as I mentioned last time, we have the mitzvah that says, Kibed et avicha ve'et imecha, make heavy your father and your mother, meaning honor them, right? So he had been very honored, meaning he really had berachot, blessings. He was wealthy, he was very wealthy. Since he had, and quite literally, since he had a large amount of possessions, he was weighed down by them and cannot travel too quickly. Ibn Ezra has a comment that's why these is the words it's used. V'miknei b'kesev u'v'zahav. How was he heavy? Me'od, so much, so weighted down. Bait, don't translate that as in here, okay? Oftentimes, bait, you got to be a little bit more flexible than maybe the gloss that you learned for it is used instrumentally, like how something is accomplished, by means of what, right? So, how was he very heavy? With miknei, with livestock. Bakesef, with silver. Uva zahav, and with literally the gold, with the livestock, with the silver. Can you see the dagesh in here so we know it was the hal, and with the zahav, with the gold. Verse Gimel, verse 3. Vayelech lemasav minegev ve'ad beit el. So the previous verse told us he's something about how he travels. He's going to travel slowly, right? Verse 1 says he traveled Hanegba, towards the Negev, so there's some emphasis on the trip. Verse 2 is giving us an indication that he's going to have to go slow, so anyone in ancient times reciting the story or reading the story would realize, okay, the reason it's taking him so long is because he's kaved me'od, right? He's become very wealthy. And Vayelech, probably this was halach, although Ibn Ezra would disagree and say it's yalach, which is a synonym verb for halach. Ibn Ezra, I can't remember where, but he makes the grammatical point that a hey in the pay position never disappears. So either way, it means went. So instead of yelech, which means he will go, it means and he went, right? The time gets swapped here by our vav. Lemasa'av, that's kind of weird. Yeah, this is from nasa, not nasa with an aleph. Don't get confused. Not the one with the aleph, meaning to go up, like NASA carrying things up, but with an ayin, literally means to pull out tent pegs, like to pull them out of the stakes, to pull them out of the ground, right? I think I mentioned last time, like in the Siddur, Ben Soa Halaron, right, when the ark would travel, right? Moshe, the Moshe would say, Kuma Adonai vayafutzu oivecha, arise Adonai, and may your enemies be dispersed, right? So if you pray the Siddur, you recognize that. So that's the same. That's the same here. So Masa, this is something like iterations, right? Is what it's of travel, right? Like legs of the trip, right? So, and he went in his legs, if you will, or Minegev, from the Negev, the Ad Beit El, man, this is his real goal, and until Beit El, Bethel, right? You probably heard this, because the reason we say Bethel is because in Tamachit, in ancient Hebrew pronunciation, a Tav, which did not have a Dagesh, was pronounced Th, like Th. So that's why it was Bethel. The Yemenites still pronounce it to this day, the Yemenite Jews, which generally it's agreed upon scholars that their pronunciation of liturgical Hebrew is the closest thing that we have today to biblical pronunciation. Ad, until Hamakom asher haya sham ohlo. Sorry, so this is, you see these two forms here. This is, one is the ketiv, how it is written, and the other, the Masoret's put in the margin for us how it is pronounced, right? So this happens as not all spelling rules were codified in the ancient times. So they wrote it this way, but we're going to pronounce this final hey not as an a, but as an o, because that's the way that the Masoret's had it memorized when they went through and they put the vowels in the text for us. But they treated the text so sacrosanct that they did not want to disturb it, so instead they just added this notation. The second one would have been in the margin. So unto the place which haya sham, which happened there, oholo, his tent. But techila, in the beginning or the start, bein Beit El uvein ha'ai, between Bethel and Ai, not like eyeball, but the place Ai. So it's the place where he had built first, referring to, remember, he built the Mizbeach we had there in the last pareshah, so he's returned back to that place. That's why this kind of awkward, cumbersome, but techila means a start or a beginning, right? Dalit, so verse 4 we have now. El Mekom HaMizbeach she'asa sham b'rishona, and then here we have a nice Hebrew parallelism, Rishona with techila, like when he started. So unto the place of the altar, so this is a construct chain here. That's why our comets is now shwa. Under the place of the altar, asher, which asa, he made, sham, there, barishona, in the beginning. And for those of you who have my book, and you might remember at the very beginning of Bereshit, it says, I translate Bereshit as in a beginning, and I kind of make my argument grammatically, and I also look at Septuagint grammatically, and also at the apostolic writings, even the Basot Yochanan grammatically, to prove that there was this understanding that was in a beginning. And even Rashi points out that if the author had wanted to say in the beginning, this is the word he would have used, barishona, that we have in our narrative here. So certainly the author was familiar with this one, with this word, because here we have it used for Avram Avinu's adventure. So he returned to the place where he built the altar, the Mizbeach, which he had made Sham there, where at Beit El, when Barishona, in the beginning, right? Because this is really the way that Hebrew says in the beginning. Barishona. Vayikra Sham Avram b'Shem Adonai. And there Avram called by the name of Hashem, right? Okay, or in his name, or it's very interesting. Kimchi comments that the actual place where the Mizbeach is at, that's what it's saying. It's at the place where his first Mizbeach, where he had built the first one, and that we learn from that a person should choose for himself a place for prayer that is of permanence, right? So a lot of my Goyim friends talk about their prayer closet, right? This is correct. And you should have, not that you must always pray at the same place, but it's good for the sake of musar, of habitually having a place where you know it's safe to pray. And it's even deeper from this. If you look in Talmud Tractate Berachot, it teaches us that when a person prays, there are certain things that should not be there. Like there should be no smell of feces, for example, right? So that's why we don't pray in the bathroom, right? Unless it's an emergency. There should be no smell of urine. There should be no sight of feces within. It depends on which sage you ask, like how far it could be. But if you can turn your head from it and it doesn't smell, fine. So really, you should not be distracted, especially if you're going into the Holy of Holies, right? If you're going to pray if you're going to get very close to Hamakom, to the ever-present one. And so this is really nice halakhic exegesis that we get from the tzaddik who was the man Avram at this time. And Ibn Ezra comments in the Mikot Gedolot that the reason that Avram built the Mizbeach teaches us about gratitude. That Avraham Avinu, here he's still just Avram, that he builds the altar here because he has successfully returned out of Egypt, which he understood was a dangerous place. And he returned with his life and with his wife. Okay? And that's it for our aliyah of the day. I hope you enjoyed it and were edified. And as always, keep studying your Hebrew. Be strong. Don't give up. You can do it. And I will see you next time. Shalom.